Well, but now everyone knows about the mass shooting event that took place last night in Maine, and our phones are ringing off the hook from members, from politicians, from reporters asking us our thoughts on the Maine situation. So we're going to do a video today here. We have Chris, Alex, and myself talking about what happened last night. There's a lot of unknowns about what happened last night. There's a lot of things that are coming into focus about the event. We're going to break down some of the initial factoids, and then from there kind of go over, I guess, the ramifications and what comes next, because make no mistake, the politicians in D.C. and your state capital have already forgotten about what happened in Maine. They're now moving ahead 100 miles an hour towards their agenda of disarming the American people completely, once and for all.
Yeah, this is the way I've said it many, many times. Every time this happens, funny, it's an election year too. Weird. But this is the politicians, this is the ruling class playing the role of Rumpelstiltskin. Every time there is a shooting, a mass shooting where the blood of the innocent dead still is on the floor, not even dry, they instantly jump on top of that blood and they work to spin it into political gold for their gun control agenda. And that's it. It's all about disarming us. It's about disarming you and empowering them, the ruling class. So I've been watching Twitter. I've been watching Twitter since last night. Every single entity that you can think of, from state legislators, like you said, Aaron, all the way up to presidents and vice presidents, are tweeting their support for massive new restrictions on gun rights and clamping down on our Second Amendment freedoms, even though they don't have a slight freaking clue what exactly is going on here. So I don't know. We just watched that press conference a few minutes ago with the governor. What a hag! What a total hag! She sits there and goes through some of the details of this, but I don't know who wants to break it down.
Well, I've got several bullet points here. We've got. Let me read off my notes here from what I captured from that press conference, Chris. We have 18 dead that we know of, 13 injured. The guy hit multiple locations. From what they said, he hit a recreation center and he hit a billiards club, all in Lewiston, Maine.
Within 12 minutes. Within 12 minutes, he hit multiple locations.
Like one was like 6:56 and one was like 7:08. So it was it was even 12 minutes. You're correct. Suspect's name is Robert Card. He is on the loose. He is running right now. And this is where the facts of the press conference end and all the media reports kind of begin. And I'm not going to stray too far, but I mean, the objective facts that we know from the media outlets that we've seen is that this guy is some sort of a military male of some sort. Maybe he's a veteran. Maybe he's active. Maybe he's National Guard. There's not 100% clarity on that. And he is now on the run in the woods. And we have seen some of these. Chris, you're in Pennsylvania, Ohio area. We've seen these recently where a guy on the run can tie up hundreds of law enforcement officers and thousands of man hours when they're haven't shown near the level of explosive violence that this guy here has. So right now, nobody knows. The guy could be found dead of a suicide, inflicted wound,
self-inflicted wound
in a ditch today at noon. He could be on the run in the woods in Maine, heavily geared up for a very long time. There's a lot of unknowns still in the situation.
So something that we've been watching on Twitter and on Facebook as this unravels is everyone immediately calling for the clampdown on gun rights, gun owners, gun confiscations, red flag laws, so on and so forth. But
yellow flag laws.
They have yellow flag laws there in Maine. But something that no one is talking about is that this man, and I don't want to say his name anymore, but this man was already on the federal radar. He'd already been institutionalized for acts of aggression. He'd already talked about killing people. Very likely he was already investigated by the federal government or some governmental agency, and yet the federal government, the state government, and the local government are not able to defend you, but yet their immediate knee-jerk reaction is to go out and do a power grab, a gun grab, if you will, to take back all control to themselves and say none of you are competent or capable of defending yourselves and your families, so give it to us. But the fact is, this guy had a history, and they already knew it, because they've already reported on it. They were already talking about it last night, that he was on their radar.
So one of the things, so I'll just answer a couple of questions I think that a lot of people have right away. What's the difference between a red flag law and a yellow flag law? There is no difference between either one of them. They are the same thing, just different colors, because these people like to use colors. But there's no difference between the two. Also, what you just said there, Alex, about him making threats to shoot, those are criminal, threats already. And there is not one state in this entire union of states that does not have a law on the books already for, what's it called, Aaron?
A temporary seizure of some kind, and there's different ways you can describe it, but you're 100% correct. It's not just a criminal offense; and that means it's an arrestable offense.
Exactly,
and that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
This guy, anybody who makes a threat to shoot up a place, a person, himself, or anything else can be and should be immediately detained for the sake of society at large and his own best interest. As you said, Chris. Every state has a TRO, an ERO, an EPO, depends on the state.
An involuntary committal process that could easily be invoked.
And or criminal sanctions that could be brought to bear to take this person off the streets. What you're seeing in many cases, we saw this happen time and again, the Parkland, Florida shooting. In many cases, It happens now where family and friends call somebody in and law enforcement does not get off their ass to deal with it. Now, I know right now, that's not in vogue to say anything negative, but we have to face the facts that if these people had been properly interdicted and properly dealt with, things could be different. What we have a lot of times right now is blue states, and make no mistake, Maine's about as blue as it gets right now. Blue states
trifecta.
With blue state prosecutors and blue state department heads who don't want to take action against people like this because it is not politically in vogue. You can't even call them homeless. Not that he was, but they have to be the unhoused now. So a person who needs to be detained and should be detained, in many cases, they're just simply not. And we as gun owners, we have to get beyond our normal instinctive reaction. We have to add to that, rather, the horror of what we see. And we have to, at the same time, steel ourselves with a resolve to not let these politicians use their institutional failings to take away our freedoms. Because if that happens, this will happen relentlessly. There'll be no one ever able to fight back.
Yeah. And how many is this now? How many mass shootings, or whatever they call them now, how many of these events do we have to have where the FBI usually had interviewed the person, or law enforcement had previous knowledge, or had talked with the people, or complaints had been filed about them already? This happens time and time again. Parkland, Florida, the Dayton killer. All these people have had previous interactions with law enforcement, credible threats that they had made, and nothing was done about it. Of course, now they just sit up there and we just got done watching the press conference by the governor. What was her name? Mills. Anyway, that hag stood up there and just sat there and just glowed and went on and on and on about how wonderful the law enforcement community has been in response to this. Well, the same freaking idiots are the ones who are not handling business beforehand. So now they're forced to stay up all night and execute these manhunts. They're not doing their job, but then they have the audacity to come back up there and say that they're the solution to the problem that they created in the first place.
And to be 100% clear, it's these same entities who will be front and center in their state capital, in your state capital, and in my state capital come January when session resumes to testify and lobby in support of all manner of gun control laws. At a minimum, additional forms of red flag laws, possibly assault weapons bans, so-called assault weapons bans. The law enforcement lobby in America, and there is, to my knowledge, almost no exceptions. There is a couple elements, but for almost no exceptions, the law enforcement entities as a lobby presence in the state capitol, not the individual officers, but as a lobby entity, are 100% opposed to our right to keep and bear arms. And what we have done is allowed our natural affection towards law and order, towards society, towards stable government, and the natural inclinations that gave us to respect law enforcement that we were all raised with as kids. We have allowed that to then to force us as gun owners to sit back and say they must know best. And we're here to tell you that is not the case. That is not the case. Their individual members might be wonderful people. Many of them are, but their lobby
the guys on the
organizations
street,
and their department heads, in particular, the department heads, and even more particular, if they're police chiefs, if they're not elected, if they're an appointed department head by a mayor, chances are they are actively working to sabotage your gun rights. And so while we all feel the disgust and the horror and the recoil of what happened in Maine, that has to be matched with a steel in your spine to know that if we let this natural affection that we have towards the victims or our respect towards law enforcement, if we let either of those things get in the way of the fight for gun rights, we'll have no gun rights left.
Yeah. And what that translates into is what the 19th century will tell you all about, or the 20th century, I'm sorry, will tell you all about, is tyrannical government that becomes genocidal towards its populations. And at the end of the day, we say this all the time in our live streams, but I'm going to say it again. Killer criminals are bad. That's awful. 18 people dead, but killer governments are far worse than a killer criminal. And that's what we're seeing right now. 18 people murdered yesterday at the drop of a hat. Of course, we're going to have to see the autopsies and things like that, because we don't really necessarily take anybody's word for anything anymore, quite frankly. But also, what the media is not telling you is that 60 people were murdered in Chicago last weekend, and the weekend before, and the weekend before, and the weekend before. And then you get back into July and the numbers start to skyrocket. But where is any of that conversation? Where is anybody talking about any of that? Because don't forget, Chicago, Illinois, has every piece of gun control that they will shout from the rooftops is the solution to this problem. That idiot David Hogg. It's the effing guns. He keeps tweeting over and over and over. Everybody's tweeting, it's the guns. It's the guns. If that's the case, and if gun control is the solution, then what is going on in Chicago? Huh?
Right.
It doesn't fit the narrative, and so they don't talk about it. That's why they get up there and they gush about how wonderful the law enforcement response has been to this tragedy. We're better than this. We will hug each other and we'll get through this, and we're total failures. Our entire system, that I'm talking from the Democrats' perspective now, the entire system that they have constructed is a total failure, and we're seeing it happen live in front of us.
So, Chris, you brought up when I bring up the whole point of this is there's 18 people died yesterday in this shooting from this madman. But you talked about 60 people died in Chicago just last weekend under gun control. But yet we do not see any press headlines ripping across the entire country, every newspaper, every website, is the fact that is only 1/16 of the daily deaths from fentanyl overdoses. What was the number from the CDC that you were just reading earlier? Per year, it's over 100,000.
106,000 people die every year in America from drug overdoses.
I've got a screenshot. I'm hesitant to even share because it comes from the CDC. We all know what their value is, but here's a screenshot. There we go. Yeah, there it is, Alex. That's something you were talking about. 107,000 basically Americans died. This is as of 2021. It's only gone up from there from drug overdoses, and it's all drugs. But we all know what the biggest killer right now is in the drug world. It's opioids and fentanyl in particular, and we all know how that gets in here. How's it get in here? Through our open,
they're not growing them
border, which is as wide open. As I was going to make a joke about our vice president, I'm not going to do that. It is wide open, and we also all know that China is the manufacturer of these drugs, and so we have hostile governments who are flooding our country, flooding America with fentanyl. 106 dead. What's the math, Alex? You said 200 and how many dead per day?
288 per day. So that's every 3 days, almost 1,000 people, 1,000 Americans are dying from drugs coming in over the open borders. But yet you don't have David Hogg sitting there tweeting out, "It's the open borders. It's the open borders."
The whole point here is that they don't give two flying, about the innocent dead. They don't care about innocent people. Heck, if they did that, they'd end abortion in America, right?
Yeah.
But they don't care about that. That's what we said at the beginning. This is a political pawn to be moved on the chessboard and their ultimate goal is to take away our guns, because they cannot implement full-blown tyrannical authoritarianism as long as people like you and me are armed to the teeth with guns. And believe me, we are to the teeth.
You have to be. You have to be.
Absolutely.
And
I've got
critical.
guns for all of my neighbors, for their kids, for their grandkids, for my kids, their kids, grandkids, you name it, because we have to. We've all seen Braveheart, right? Remember the scene where the king's going to go full-blown tyrant. What do? They go back to their thatched huts, and they reach up into the grass and they pull out the swords that were long ago outlawed, and they say, you know what? It's time. We're going to take back our freedom. And so that's what we modern day Bravehearts have to do. We have to do it. We have to make sure that we've got the guns so that when these people decide to do that, we have the ability to resist their tyranny. And that's what it is at the end of the day. Dead air.
Better be, and everyone has to have serious conversations. It's kind of funny, Chris. I called you about this last week, 10 days ago. Just how fast the world is devolving now, absolutely out of control. The fact that I guess it was Atlanta airport just last week, some random crazy woman is like stabbing people in the TSA check-in line. I've been to the airport a cajillion times. Actually, all three of us have. The world is devolving, and what we thought was like the normal tolerance for like crazy behavior, it was always like such a rare deal. It's just not rare anymore. People are crazy. The government won't restrain or detain them. They want them on our streets to create the chaos, because they're then selling the cure, which is what? Gun control. We all know that.
Well, they did it. They did it in the Bolshevik Revolution. They turned the criminals out. They turned them loose into society.
Right. So we need to be thinking about this. I'm speaking to myself here in a different way than we have been in previous decades, because the assumption of a normal, peaceful society is quickly coming to an end, and that affects everything about the way you go to church, the way you go out with your family, the way you go out to eat. And everything has to be reconsidered. This happened in a billiards club, a pool hall last night, and at some kind of a recreation.
A lot of time in billiards clubs, man.
Yeah.
And this is the world we live in, and it's not going to get any better voluntarily, because the government enjoys the ramifications of these things, because they use that chaos, as we've been saying, until we're blue in the face, to pass gun control. And we have got to get real, both from a personal security standpoint and from a political standpoint. These events will not stop, and they're only going to be used to disarm all of us. And I think a lot of people are sitting here thinking to themselves, well, I'm in a red state, so they ain't doing that crap here. And I'm just telling you, that is not the case. That is not a safe assumption to make. Chris, you fought for years, are still fighting off and on, to kill off red flag gun seizures in red Ohio. We've had lawmakers in Missouri.
I spent all summer in Tennessee.
We were in Tennessee.
Yeah, I forgot. So many states.
Yep.
We have lawmakers in Missouri talking about red flag laws. We have lawmakers in Wyoming, for heaven's sakes, had recently talked about a version of red flag laws. So we have Republicans all across this country, especially the state level, who would stab us in the back in a moment. And we have got to be real with that. They have got to be hearing from us. They've got to be hearing from you individually. You see them at church, you see them at a forum, you see them at an event, you see them at the Baumgar's hardware store. Better talk to them and say, you know what? There's no quarter here. There's no inch that I will accept you giving away for my freedoms. I will not be willing to live in a society where bad guys can have weapons like that guy had last night, and I have nothing but prayer to fight back with. I'm going to be armed. I'm going to defend my family. And if you don't fight to defend those freedoms in the state capitol or in Congress, I'll find somebody else who will.
Preach it. It turns out that when you take God out of the schools, when you implement a welfare state that totally destroys the role of fathers in families, especially in minority populations, when you destroy the family unit, then when the Marxists take control of all of the institutions within a culture, it turns out that chaos and moral degeneracy skyrocket. That's exactly what we're seeing here. It's not.
It was intended that way.
Exactly. This isn't a failure of our public schools. This is exactly what they've intended.
Purpose.
This is the results that they've been looking for, to undermine and destroy the Western Christian culture that America was built upon. And Paul Harvey said it, decades ago. If America ever falls, it will be because not some other idiot country came in and invaded us. It's because we killed ourselves, morally bankrupted ourselves. That's what's happening right here, right now. And so we wanted to come on here and talk to you guys all again to remind you, you share no guilt. You are not complicit. You have no responsibility here other than to defend your freedom from those who are bent on using these kind of occasions and tragedies to try to further their agenda that will only result in tragedies at a scale you and I cannot comprehend, maybe not in our lifetimes, but surely in our kids or our grandkids. That's our duty. That's our responsibility. That's how we're supposed to react in times like this, to stand up and beat our chests and say, abso-freaking-lutely not 1 millimeter of compromise. We will not let you take the ground because you bastards are to blame. Period.